Now, let's go ahead with this motivating example. Some of you were very anxious and asked me again, please don't ask me whether we're going to have a quiz or not. If it is necessary, I will give you the information, okay? And at the suitable time. Okay, turn off your cellular phones. Turn off your cellular phones because you are responsible for the noise. Okay, everybody. Okay, now let's go back to this example that you had, the contractor example. Okay, let's move. We need to cover a reasonable material today on this topic. Okay. Look at, for example, how the experience, the criterion experience is evaluated. For example, for constructor A, constructor A has 5 years of experience, and they have already performed 2 similar projects. So you can see that experience can be in terms of number of years or in terms of similar jobs that have been undertaken. Financial stability can be measured in terms of the assets of the other company, as well as the growth in the assets, because the direction that those companies are going. And if they don't have any debt, if they don't have any liability, that's also something which is very good. So you can see that actually the way that we can measure financial stability is, in this case, there are 3 different things that we are considering. Now it is important that we understand what each of them means when we are actually doing this business, but at the same time, it is important how you specify what you have written as criterion here. So what you see there are actually, there might be some sub-criterion which are used. Okay, so this is basically what we're going to talk about in a little bit more abstract way. Okay, so this is the next one. So what are the typical examples? What is our target? We want to resolve certain problems where we are selecting a department or a university. We're trying to buy an automobile, okay? Or in general, we are going to make a one-time decision. And so what we need to do is we need to observe the limitations in making this one-time decision. For example, think about what were the limitations that you had when you were making a selection. You were limited with the resources that you have. I mean, how many trips can you make to different universities? You need... Okay, turn everything off. Okay, who is responsible for this? I heard the sound. Okay. Okay, let's at least try this time. It's not going to work. I hate this. I hate this. Wallahi. Okay. Okay, this is the extent of electronics. Good old ways. Okay, so note that we have some limitations in making this decision. We have monetary limitations. We have time limitations. Think about, you want to buy an automobile. How many days can you spend on getting information and buying? Of course, you can work on that forever. But then next year, the other, another brand is going to come out. So you will never be able to decide. So there is a certain extent that you are going to spend on this decision. So you have a budget, the money that you can spend, and a time limitation on the information that can be collected. And this is a realistic constraint. Okay? So in other words, we really want to measure certain things in a better way, but we cannot do because of these limitations. But this is what we are going to deal with. Now, the first thing that we do in this type of problems, we generate criteria. Now I'm going to give you the formal definition of a criteria. Singular of a criteria is a plural word. Singular of criteria is criterion. So the dictionary meaning of criterion is a standard rule or test by which something can be judged. So it is any value you think is important for judging that specific circumstance. Any value. So this is like something very similar to performance, but I think it is a little bit more abstract than performance because this is basically a more general meaning. Remember the examples that you gave. You gave, for example, campus life. Campus life is not a performance in itself. It can become a performance if you specify certain other things. But it is a criterion. It means that I am going to consider campus life when I'm going to make a decision. Is it a performance? Of course, when you look at a specific university, with respect to campus life, you're going to measure the performance of that university. But the relation is in that respect. So if we define criterion in a more functional way, it's an aspect of alternative that you wish to optimize, minimize, maximize, or another thing. So it's an aspect of an alternative that you want to have as a whole, or you want to maximize if it is cost. No, if it is distance, you want to minimize, so on and so forth. Now, in this case, okay, this set of criteria should represent decision makers' concerns. The question that I asked you represented your concern. But if you are going to make a decision for yourself, for example, if you are going to buy a car, whether the color is important or not may not be a concern of some of you, but some of you, on the other hand, may say that color is the ultimate decision point for me. I want a red card regardless whether it runs or not. Okay? That might be a choice as well. Okay? So you can see that the decision maker concern, the decision maker's concern should go into the definition of the criteria. Now, of course, now what we need to do is for each criterion that we specify, we need to determine at least one performance measure to reflect the essence of the criterion. How are we going to measure it? In other words, tell me a performance measure related to campus quality. Tell me a performance measure which is related to the ranking of the university. Tell me a performance measure. Now you can understand the relation of what we have been doing in the quizzes and homeworks together with what you want to make a decision of. Okay? So basically, we want to make sure that we have a performance, at least one. We may have more. Remember in the previous example that I gave for the construction business, we have more performance measures there. For financial stability, for example, we had 3 performance measures. Okay? And so on. Okay. Now, what is a measure? Measure is basically quantification, not necessarily numerically, we're going to see that. Quantification of one aspect of the criteria. Unfortunately, when you talk about, let's say, the reputation of the university, you might give several different performance measures that will measure the performance with respect to reputation, but none of them will be able to fully describe what is meant in that criterion. So usually we have quantification of one aspect of the criterion as a measure. Now this is unfortunate because if we had complete identification, then life would be simpler. Those type of problems are called structured problems. Whereas here, we can only enlighten a part of the criterion with a single performance measure. So that's the reason why we need to use more performance measures in general in order to have the complete picture of what's going on. Okay, so next. Now, we have the criterion, list of criterion as we had before. Of course, you can group them. Yes?
While making a criteria, how we are going to make a priority? Like. Okay,
still we have, I'm going to talk about that. It is to come. So now we have a set of criteria. We don't know the priorities yet. Okay? But you say that if I am going to make this decision, these are the issues that are relevant for me to make that decision. So that's the set of criteria. Okay. Now, how are we going to measure the criteria? So let's go one more step towards measurement. So we know that we are going to have some measures, and those measures actually will have some values. Now, some of them can have numerical continuous values. Think about one criteria that you mentioned, university scores, the score that you had when you were making a decision. Now, of course, if you are in between certain, approximately in a certain range, you know that you can come to Bilkent. Okay? Of course, the above is unlimited. We're talking about a lower limit. Okay? If you are lower than that, the chances of coming to Bilkent is less. Every year you can guess that. So this is numerical and a continuous value, if you are going to measure that, for example. Okay? This is what we know and usually understand from measurement. Now, it can be numerical, and we can assign a number, or we can actually measure it with a ruler, if it's that kind of a criteria. Or it can be categorical, which means that you are going to construct categories on that. For example, remember the example which was related to construction business. We had good, and bad organization. Good organization, good organization. So the categories there are only two. You either have a good organization or a bad organization. Now, once you specify these categories, it is also possible to assign each alternative one of these categories. You know, for example, the companies that are applying for this job. So you can rate the companies and either say it is good or bad. Okay? I am exaggerating a little bit. It's not going to be that easy, but that's called categorical or constructed grouping. Okay? And we're going to see how we can construct those categories in the university entrance examples. Okay. Now, next thing that we will do is basically once we know how we are going to measure them, some of them will be in numbers, some of them will be in groups, some of them we will use letters or numbers to denote those groups, categories. But this is the way that we are going to measure. Now you can see why it is unstructured. Because it depends on the person who is constructing that. It's not like solving the minimum path problem or minimum distance problem. Okay? It's universal. You know the distances, you measure the distances, they are there. The distances are not debatable. Okay? And you solve the problem. Whereas here, the categories are debatable. Of course, as a decision maker, you will do it according to what you think will be the differentiating factor between categories. So now we can see that why it is in general, it is more difficult to make personal decisions than certain number crunching in the companies. It's very difficult to do that because there is no universal way of doing it. Whereas if you are managing a company, certain production plans and so on can easily be done because the expectations are more universal when you are doing a production plan. We're going to learn a lot of things about those type of things, but you need to know about these unstructured decisions as well because there is always a connection. Okay, any questions on this? So let me go another step. Okay, now, so step one was what? Step one was set of criteria. Step two was to define values for the measure. Range of values. For example, the university entrance score should be 200 and more. Or the categories should be 1, 2, 3, and 4, meaning this. Okay, you specify the possibilities. The third one is you collect data for each alternative on each criterion or measure that you have in the system. Okay, you collect information. So, for example, if your choices are all the possible universities in Turkey, you look at the scores of each university, set the ranges of those universities, find out those, that's information actually, and put it there. And then you're going to put your score and find out the chances of entering that university with that score. Okay? So this is data collection for each alternative and for each measure considered, assess a numerical or a categorical value to what you have. This is basically what we do actually in an explicit sometimes, but more in an implicit way. So what are the sources that we use? We use public sources, tests, pilot studies, or various different sources. For example, you could have used number of tweets that were favored versus something else if that was available. Okay? So this is an information. Usually requires time and budget. You cannot do this endlessly. There is a certain time that you should end. You use statistical techniques to observe some data and to do some regression data analysis and so on and so forth. And sometimes, this is important, you solve a problem like shortest path problem. Okay, to figure out what is the minimum distance from the place that you are going to live, let's say, to the university. Okay, and that's a value that you are going to use when you are making a decision if distance to the university is an important factor for you. Okay, nobody mentioned about distance. For example, there might be some requirements for some of you to live in a certain neighborhood. Okay, you have a house there, you have your family there, you have your friends there for whatever reason. And you have to make sure that the university is not far away. If the university is far away, then you have to take the train from Konya to Ankara every day and then go back to Konya. That's a possibility, of course. Why not? That's a very good idea, actually, if you come to think of it. You're going to have a lot of time to work in the train. Okay. So this is basically what we do. We might solve some models, structured problems, to obtain information, data, to value a single criterion or for a certain alternative. Okay, questions? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is, I think, something which is important. At this point, what do we have? We have criteria, we have alternatives, University A, University B, University C criteria. We know each criteria is divided into some measures, okay? And for each alternative, I have values of those universities that I computed or found from some source, but I have a value assigned with respect to each measure for each alternative. So I have a matrix of values. Okay? So this is what I have. But still I have a long way to go. Because we're talking about apples and oranges. Think about a categorical data, a categorical value set, which is, let's say, takes a value of A, B, C, and D. Category A, category B, category C, category D. The other one is a set of numbers in between 200 and 335. Okay? So you have one type of that, and then you have another category which is like 1, 2, 3, depending on how you manage those categories. Now, what you have to do is you have to bring all of these together. But before doing that, what we usually do is we standardize them. Standardizing them means that we put them all into the interval 0, 1, okay? So that now they are going, regardless of the weight that we are going to give to them, they are going to look similar. So what we're going to have is we're going to transform the data, the range, into the scale of 0, 1. And usually we use a linear transformation. There are certain methods that uses nonlinear transformation, geometric type transformations, but we're going to use, in our case, in this course, we're going to use a linear transformation. What does it mean? If you have a range, the lowest value of the range will be 0. The highest value of the range will be 1, and you're going to have a linear interpolation in between for the remaining values. You know how to do that, probably. If you have numbers in between 0 and 50, 50 is going to be transformed to 1. 0 is going to be transformed to 0. For example, 25 is going to be transformed to 0.5. You're going to take linear share of everything and make that transformation. Now, why do we need this step? We need this step because we want to make sure that, okay, all those look alike, at least before we put some kind of a weight in front of them. At this point, we still don't know which one is more important for us. But they are identically represented in front of us. This is what we are doing here. OK, so it means that I can now transform the scores that I obtained for each alternative into this range 0, 1. OK? Any questions on this? Now, this is purely for arithmetic simplification. We could have operated in a different way, but we put in the scale of 0, 1 just to make sure that they all look alike. OK. Now, the next step will be putting relative importance. Now, this is the place where each of you are going to have a different relative importance that you give to these criteria and to these measures. So, if you, for example, if I am the analyst and if you are the decision maker, what I will do is I can obtain these relative importances by asking you pairwise comparisons. For example, I can say, do you prefer 1 to 2, let's say category 1 to category, or do you prefer one value for, let's say, exam, if you had 0.1 points more in the exam compared to 0.1 of something else. Now, by asking questions like this, which I'm not going to go into the detail because they are not very simple to ask those questions, you can obtain some information on the preferences of the decision maker. But eventually, those preferences will be very simple to represent. For example, let me ask one of you only. So let me have one volunteer. Let's say we have 4 criteria that we are using for decision. Academic quality, and location, and social. Let's have 3. OK. So tell me the importance that you give to any one of those when you are making a decision. So location, physical location with physical properties, let's say. Academic environment, academics of the place. And the third one was social relations or social environment. So let me have a volunteer. Yes. So give me your weights. Now, the way that I'm going to ask you will be very simple. Why not have those weights sum up to, let's say, 100? So if you are going to make a decision, what is the percentage of criterion 1 that you would ask for? Now, if you think that they are equally important, what will be the weights that you are going to use? 33.3, 33.3, 33.3, because sum is going to be 100. So if you think that they are equal, they are all going to be the same. But if one of them is more important for you, then you're going to give a larger point. So now tell me what your values are.
I think academics like 50%.
50% academics.
And social life 40%.
Social life 40%, location 10%. OK, so you are equally weighing, almost equally weighing social life with academics. OK, anybody who doesn't agree with these weights? Do you all agree with these weights? Is that the reason why you are all here? Anybody who doesn't agree with these weights? Come on, there should be somebody. Okay? Okay. You're laughing, yeah, you. What are your weights? Yes, don't look around. I'm pointing at you.
I don't think the 50%. I think it's more important.
Academics is more important. So 60?
Maybe 60 or 70.
70 and the others?
15.
Okay. So the others are equal for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is actually what we mean by weights. So if we have these weights, thank you. If we have these weights, and thank you as well, of course. If we have these weights in front of us, now we have one more step for decision making in this very simple and crude analysis. So what we're going to do is I'm going to multiply those scores that I have for each alternative with the weights that I think are important. And eventually, I'm going to select the one with the largest weight, with the largest value, am I right? Among the alternatives. So let's say that I have 5 different universities as alternative. I will simply select that one. Okay, so this is the procedure, actually. Okay. Now, if you have multiple decision makers, of course, you can take them to a room, and they are going to fight for the weights. But eventually, they are going to come up with the weights for you. Now, there are a number of deficiencies of this approach, of course. This is a very informal approach. You are not going to see this approach ever in another course, because you're going to see more sophisticated approaches. But this is very important to understand, because this is how one tends to make decisions. Okay? And this is how you're going to do your own decisions. So now I think what I will do is, this is the final computation. So this is what I told you. For each alternative and performance measure, multiply the weight with the score that you have, and add the scores for each alternative. Analyze more closely the ones that are highest. In other words, if I were you, I wouldn't take for granted the highest one. Usually you have the tendency of saying that, oh, this is the highest, I select that one. No, look at the numbers. Maybe you misidentified certain things because you only understand the procedure after you finish everything. Okay? So you will, if I were you, I would look at the highest scores again. If they are very close to each other, discuss them again. Maybe re-evaluate the information, go and pick up more information, but evaluate those two. And finally, come with the one which is the highest eventually. Okay? Now, there is also another thing that you can do, which is called sensitivity analysis. It means that what if the weight was not 70, 15, 15, but it was 65, 17.5, 17 point, something like that. Okay? So this is the sensitivity. Would my result change? How effective are my scores? If you have a robust solution, which means that even if you change a little bit, the solution doesn't change, that's good. But if the solution immediately changes, then maybe you have to think twice before you go ahead. So sensitivity analysis is what we do in those cases. Okay. Now, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to solve Miguel's problem. Going to school, he's going to select his college. He has some alternatives, and we're going to help him. Okay, this is all in your notes, but we're going to go over it very quickly. Now, probably, can I have your attention? Probably it's a good time to announce that you're going to have a quiz today. And the quiz will be very much related to this example that we're going to see. So if we understand this example, the quiz will be very simple to solve. Okay. I think you all have a copy of this. Now, there are 4 tables here. And this is the material which is in your reading list for today, which I was able to put at the web before lunch. Okay, so what we have is we have the typical problem here of selecting the college, as they call it, the college of Miguel. Miguel has listed 4 different potential places to go, which are, if you look at page 140, the alternatives are Podunk University, State University, IQU, which is a university that I don't know where it is. And the other one is a Polytech. I think I also don't know that one as well. I know none of them, actually, because they are not real universities. However, this is good for the example. So he has 4 alternatives that he decided that he can go. Let's look at page 139, types and ranges of measures, because in that table, we're going to see a number of things that are important for Miguel to make the decision. Okay. Excuse me, I think, turn the page. I think it's better if we look at the last page, 143. Where we see the criterion for Miguel. Miguel has 4 criteria: academics, cost, location, and social life. Note that it is very similar to what you have written. Of course, you have more details. And as a measure of academics, he has 2 things. One of them is the average combined SAT score. SAT is like your central university entrance examination score, but it is something that you can take twice or 3 times a year. It's not necessarily for placement. It's only a score that you use, the university use for admitting you to the university. So average combined SAT score is basically the scores that those universities declare at their websites. So for example, the value that, for example, the first university, the least preferred value for the SAT, combined SAT score is 900, which means that if you have a score below 900, you won't be able to enter to any of these 4 universities. Well, you may, but the chances are slimmer. The highest score is 1,400, which corresponds to almost 97% success. Okay? So I think that's the upper limit that they consider, which is a reasonable one. Now, the second one that they consider is another information that's available publicly, which is the university's ranking in the US News and World Report rank. Now, this organization, US News and World Report, ranks the universities looking at certain criteria every year. Now, we have similar organizations in Turkey doing the same thing. Some of you may know that, but some of you may not. Now, of course, these rankings are not only suitable for undergraduate education. They take into consideration many other things. But people prefer to have these rankings considered. Now, the second criteria of Miguel for this example is cost. And in our case, I didn't hear the word cost from you. And so this is interesting because basically I would think that this would be an important factor. For those of you who are looking for scholarships or who are taking credits, bank credits, and so on, but once you are in, you never think about those, of course, because then it means that that's also planned and you have your income coming from somewhere. But when you are entering the university, this is one of the important concerns. There are 2 things that is considered as measured. One of them is the living expenses. You can actually obtain some living expense figure for Bilkent. And if you are interested, we can make a computation on that. And you can also know exactly what the tuition and fees are. Of course, different universities, tuition and fees will be different. Living expenses will be different. Location is, we didn't discuss why we wanted location as a factor, but location is either because of the weather or because it is near to a place that you want to be. Here in this case, Miguel wants to be near to home, and so that's the reason why he wrote nearness to home. But the average daily high temperature is also important for some people. I know some people are coming from Izmir. They always complain about the cold in Ankara, but not this year probably. This year was very good. But basically that might be something which is important. Social life. Athletics is one of the things that we don't have here. So I wouldn't expect you to select Bilkent because of the quality it has in athletics. We have university teams running around all the time doing some little things, but not very successful in general compared to some other universities. Reputation is important. This is basically what you meant with having social friends and so on and so forth. And size is also important. Some people think that a larger size will give them more chances to meet a lot of people. Some people think that a smaller size will be better because it will be an intimate environment, and so on and so forth. So those are the factors that is written by Miguel. So we have to respect him, but we are only the analyst helping him. Okay. So now let's go back to page 139. Now we have all the measures written here. And the way that we are going to measure them is given in the second column, which is called range of scale. So for example, the average combined SAT score, we have 900 to 1,400. These are some numbers. So your score is going to be, the score of that university is going to be, the average score of that university for acceptance is going to be the value that you are going to select for that university. In the US, it's not your score because it's not the only concern. In Turkey, I can understand that your score is ultimately important because it doesn't allow you to enter the places that you cannot if it requires a larger value. Whereas in the US, the average score that the university accepts is important. They are not only looking at your SAT score. You apply with other qualities to those universities as well. In Turkey, we started to have similar things. We call it the backdoor. For IB, for example, graduates, we have some kind of a backdoor. And we are going to have more backdoors because probably the system is going to change in a few years. Okay, we're going to be more like the US style. Okay, now the second one is US News and World Report rank. So what you have is you have a ranking made by the US News, an organization. Now, of course, this is categorical and it is constructed by you. You are saying that if it is in top 25, I am going to give it as category 1. If it is in between 26 and 100, it will be category 2, because it's very hard to differentiate, for example, the highest rank from the second highest. So what you do is you create categories in order to use that. So you have 4 categories: top 25, 26 to 100, 101 to 250. A total of 250 colleges are ranked only. Okay? And number 4 is unranked. You might not be ranked there. Okay. This is called categorically constructed type. Living expenses is a monetary value. It's continuous. So it is as is. Tuition and fees are monetary values, continuous. Average daily high temperature is something that you can find from some state organization that keeps all the data for 50, 60, 75 years. Okay? Nearness to home is a matter of distance. So, for example, if you are commuting in between 0 and 100 miles, you think that it is near. This is true for the US standards because people are used to driving long distances. Whereas in Turkey, nearness to home is 5 kilometers for us usually. Okay? If it is further than 5 kilometers, we say that, oh, it's burden. Okay. So these are the categories that are constructed for Miguel. Similarly, in athletics, you have rankings. Reputation, let's look at the reputation. Now, reputation is basically something qualitatively that can be assigned. So you might be interested in a seriously academic reputation. I think the person who said reputation meant both academic reputation and partying at the same time. So 1 is seriously academic, 2 is balanced academics and social life, 3 is party school. Okay, you don't do anything but just party all the time. Okay? Of course, you can use any university for that purpose, but if the whole university is partying, that's even better. Okay, there are some universities like that. I can give you some hints. Not in Turkey, of course. We are too serious for that, unfortunately. Okay, so these are the way that the categories are set. This is step 2. Now let's have step 3. These are the measurements. This is page 140. Page 140 are each university is measured according to these measures, and you obtain the value of the university. For example, let's look at the Polytechnic University. The average combined SAT score is highest there. You can see that it's more technically oriented school, so it is higher. Not necessarily better than the others, of course. We don't know that. Okay. For example, living expenses, you can see that in Polytech it is the highest, and the others are more or less the same. Let's look at the reputation. State University is a party school. You can see that it's 3. Okay? On the other hand, the IQU and Polytechnic are more serious universities. They are boring, serious universities. Nearness to home. We're talking about Miguel's home, of course. Okay? So this is actually, we obtain this information and we place those values there. And then we go to page 141. What we do is we actually place everything into we convert it to common units. The table is not complete, so you can complete the table. This means that, for example, what we do is for, let's say, the academics, 900 is the least number, 1,400 is the largest number, so the range is 500. And what was the score of the first university? It's 1,550. So we're talking about 150 in a range of 500. So it's 30%, 0.3. You can see how we computed that. Any problems with that? I think it's very simple. Okay, let me repeat again. Okay, if you settle, I will repeat this. Okay, the range is in between 900 and 1,400. So, and the score that I am trying to represent in a scale of 0, 1 has a score of 1,500. So 0 actually corresponds to 900, 1 corresponds to 1,400. So I'm simply going to take interpolation. So this is simply 1,500 minus 900 divided by 1,400 minus 900. So this is simply 150 divided by 500, which corresponds to 0.3. Okay? Linear interpolation. Very simple. Any problems with this? This is what you have done for 12 years in high school, actually, and previously. Okay. Now, of course, for the categorical ones, it's a little bit more difficult, because what you need to do is you need to represent the categorical values in between 0 and 1. So let's see, for example, how it was done for reputation. Now, for reputation, let's look at the reputation. Now, reputation is basically, I have 3 groups If it is 1, it means that it is an academic school. If it is 3, it's a party school. If it is 2, it is balanced. Now here the key is, please bear with me for a few more minutes, because I want to finish this here. So the key here is, how are you going to convert these values into the scale of 0, 1? Now Miguel is, I can see that Miguel is like an engineer type. So he thinks that if we are also engineers, I'm not saying anything bad for engineers, okay? So what he does is, if it is academic, Miguel thinks that it will be the best for him. So if it is academic, the score in the range of 0 and 1 will be 1 for that university. If it's the party place, this is the worst possible thing that can happen for Miguel. And he's going to give 0. And if it is balanced, he's going to give 0.5. But this is how Miguel converts the categorical data into the scale of 0, 1. 1 being most desirable, 0 being less desirable. Now, of course, I can vote now. This might not be your choices. Yes?
Isn't Podunk University is balanced? So we give 1 to Podunk.
Oh, Podunk University is balanced. Okay. So this is one way of selecting. Very good. I framed Miguel incorrectly. Miguel wants everything balanced. So what he is going to do is, he's going to give balanced category value of 1. And he is going to give the others value of 0. This is, I think, how he is doing. It describes in the text. I don't remember. But on the other hand, some of you may come up and say that, for me, it is important that the university would be a party university. My niece is actually looking for a university like that. She's saying that I don't want to study anymore. I'm fed up with it. So I want to go to a university where I can sit with my guitar and play my guitar every day sitting on the grass. Okay, that's her vision of university. So if in that case, she would give 1 to the party university, 0 to the academic one, maybe 0.5 to balanced. You can see that you can convert the categorical information in the way that you think which one is the best for you. Of course, if you are multiple decision makers, then you have to make sure that you can do this all together. Okay. Now, final thing. Any questions on this? Yes?
How we are going to
Shh.
like nearness to home?
Okay, nearness to home, I think, if I am not mistaken, you have the complete result in your notes, actually. Nearness to home is going to be, you have 4 categories. You want it near, actually. Now, if I were to select, I would probably do the reverse. But I wouldn't have this as a criterion in it, personally. But if you have this as a criterion, it means that if it is in between 0 and 100 miles, you are going to call it 1. And if it is further than 500 miles, it will be 0. And then it will be linear in between. But again, it depends on what you see as your target. Okay, that's the best thing for categorical variables. Okay, shh. One more sentence before we stop. Okay, one more sentence. Okay, and now once I have done this, now I can look at the table in page 143. In that table, you have least preferred, most preferred, and then you have the rank order of the criterion. Okay? Now, rank order is one way to compute the weight. What you do is you first rank from most important to least important, and then you convert it to a number. Or conversely, you can give the numbers as we did here. Okay? So both of them are, can be done. So rank order may not be needed if you can assign the points. Now, if you are talking about a simple problem, you can do the assignment. Otherwise, it might be difficult to do that if you are with multiple decision makers. So ranking is one way of doing it. You can read that from your notes. But once you have that, you can calculate the ultimate selection that Miguel is going to have. And please read that in your notes. Okay, any questions? If you have any questions, I will be answering those questions after the break, okay? So look at these. And the quiz will be after the break, so we're gonna divide you into two again, but this time, A to K is going to go above, and the rest is going to stay here. I am very democratic, very.